Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a really fascinating stack of sources. They connect ancient philosophy all the way to, well, cutting-edge computer architecture.
Yeah, it's quite the mix. And we're trying to wrestle with this huge question. What actually builds character? Is it an easy life or is it struggle? Maybe even brutal struggle.
It's a debate that, maybe surprisingly, maps right onto systems engineering, doesn't it?
It really does. We're looking at these two big competing ideas, the Crucible Thesis versus what the sources call the Conscious Ascent Thesis. And then we pivot.
Right, to this pretty radical technical framework, something designed to, eliminate waste and inefficiency.
Exactly. Inefficiency. The sources use Caligula, the Roman emperor, as the sort of ultimate case study in moral entropy.
A life with basically absolute power,
Yeah.
no real consequences, total ease,
Yeah.
and he just completely deteriorates. Tyranny, self-destruction, the
Yeah.
works.
And it raises that universal question. Does a life without significant hardship, inevitably poison the soul? Does ease just inherently make us weak, less resilient?
So Caligula is like the philosophical warning sign.
He's the failure mode, yeah.
Yeah.
And the core problem linking philosophy and engineering here, the sources call it the tyranny of the gap between abstraction and reality.
Okay, the Sado gap. We've talked about this before, the difference between what we intend and what actually happens.
Precisely. Whether you're like writing software or just planning your life, that gap between what you say, your intentions, your code, your plans, and what you actually do, the execution, the outcomes, the actions, that's the root cause.
The root of all systemic waste.
Systemic waste, computational drift, mistrust, and yeah, critically moral entropy. So our mission today is really to see if human purpose can actually be engineered in a way.
And maybe if engineering can be cleaned up, purified of human weakness.
That's the big question we're digging into.
Okay, let's start with the classic argument then. Side A, the Crucible Thesis. This is, the traditional viewpoint, driven by what you call push motivation.
Right. The idea that character gets built when life, pushes you around, shoves you down.
This is the view often championed by, like, the self-made survivor type, or maybe the traditionalist.
Yeah, exactly. And their core belief is pretty straightforward. Resilience, inner strength, that stuff is only forged in hardship you didn't choose. Often brutal hardship.
Yeah.
The narrative is basically, I suffered, and therefore I am strong.
So ease is seen as almost dangerous,
Okay.
a path to weakness.
Directly. But the sources don't just leave it there. They immediately bring up survivor bias.
Ah, right. For every person who says, oh, the struggle made me who I am, there are how many others?
Countless others, potentially, people whose potential was just crushed by unnecessary suffering, maybe addiction or even death. They didn't survive to tell the tale of resilience.
So that hardship wasn't crucible at all.
No, if it was unchosen and didn't serve any constructive purpose, the sources are pretty clear. It was destructive trauma. It was just waste. Pointless suffering.
Okay, so that leads us to the other side, side B, the Conscious Ascent Thesis. This aligns more with modern psychology.
Generally, yes. And their core belief is almost the opposite.
Which is?
They argue that stability, a foundation of rationality, safety, predictability, that's the necessary launchpad. You need that stable ground for real human flourishing, for creativity, for self-actualization.
You don't build a rocket on shifting sand. Makes sense.
Precisely. So they reject this idea that you just have to wait for the world to smack you around to learn something. They believe in pull motivation.
Okay, so not being pushed by pain, but pulled forward, pulled by aspiration towards, like, a better version of yourself.
Exactly that. And the synthesis, the path the sources seem to champion, is using that stable foundation to actively seek out voluntary hardship.
You choose your own crucible. You don't wait for life to hand you one?
Right. It reframes suffering. It's not this blunt external force anymore. It becomes a chosen precision tool that you apply yourself.
But how do you avoid this just becoming, I don't know, self-help talk? How do you know it's constructive voluntary challenge, not just making life hard for no reason?
Well, think of the difference between, say, rigorous physical training to build muscle that's constructive versus, randomly walking into traffic clearly destructive. The choice, the sources suggest, comes from listening to what they call heuristic wisdom.
Heuristic wisdom. Like intuition.
Sort of. That little inner voice, maybe, that tells you what you need to work on, what skill you need to master, what fear you need to face. Voluntary hardship provides that necessary resistance, those consequences, but on your terms.
So your character, the structure of it, doesn't atrophy from lack of challenge.
Exactly. Which is precisely the problem with Caligula, right? He never had to choose anything difficult. His character just decayed in the entropy of ease.
And that power to choose, that engine of growth you mentioned earlier.
That's what they call the human capacity for conscious ascent. That key moment of personal choice where you say, no, I don't want that. I reject the easy path.
And what generates that choice?
It seems to be vividly seeing the gap, the actuality-potential gap, the tension between who you are right now and the ideal self you could become. It's aspiration giving structure, giving purpose to the resistance you choose.
Okay, that idea of decay, of entropy, that feels like a really important bridge here. When we talk about Caligula or any system falling apart, we're essentially talking about moral entropy.
Yeah, that natural tendency for character, or really any organized system, to just sort of unwind, decay if there isn't some constant structuring force holding it together.
And this decay, this entropy, brings us to a really interesting point the sources make about sociology almost. Why the old guard, the traditionalists, often cling so tightly to that Crucible Thesis, why they almost weaponize it.
It's fascinating, isn't it? They often use the supposed necessity of hardship to protect something hidden. Control. And the status quo. Think about it. Why defend an old, inefficient, maybe even painful system when a clearly better, smarter one comes along?
Because the old system is what they know.
Partly, but it's deeper. Because that inefficient system legitimizes the meaning of their own lives. They endured it. They suffered through that wasteful, painful process to get where they are.
So if a new path emerges, one that's smarter, less wasteful, maybe bypasses all the pain they went through,
then their own suffering starts to look unnecessary. Their identity, their sense of accomplishment feels threatened. Their whole narrative, I overcame this hard system, gets undermined if it turns out the system didn't need to be that hard.
Wow. So defending the system's inefficiency becomes a defense of their personal identity, their life story. That's powerful.
It really is. And it contrasts so sharply with what the sources present as the superior path. The chosen awakening.
Which relies less on getting hit by external hardship and more
on profound foresight. The ability to simulate future regret, basically. To understand consequences without having to experience the worst outcomes directly. You don't need to actually fall into the pit to appreciate the danger.
It's about being pulled by aspiration again, rather than pushed by suffering.
Exactly. Pulled towards an ideal, a higher version of yourself.
Okay, let's loop back to Caligula then. His real problem wasn't necessarily having too much power, was it? It was that the power was...
unchanneled power, yeah. All that energy, that life force, the French call it élan vital. It had no structure, no direction, so it just turned inward, became destructive, indulgent.
And the solution proposed is the self-imposed channel. Finding a purpose that directs that energy outwards.
Precisely. A transcendent purpose, maybe mastering a craft, maybe service to others, pursuing deep knowledge, whatever it is. Something that takes that raw vitality and channels it towards creation, not destruction.
So character, in this view, is really just the discipline needed to maintain that channel, day in, day out.
That seems to be the idea. If Caligula had found some purpose beyond himself, some meaningful channel for his energy, maybe he wouldn't have collapsed into that self-absorbed tyranny.
Okay, so we've established this idea.
Right.
Channeling human intention is key to fighting off moral entropy. Now, the big shift from philosophy to hardcore engineering, the unity principle patent.
Right. This is basically a technical blueprint. It's designed to impose that kind of self-imposed channel, but on data itself, to eliminate the say-do gap in software and hardware systems.
This is where it gets really wild, I think. The patent proposes this huge paradigm shift, a new core mathematical identity.
Yeah, this is the heart of it. Semantic organization, S, is mathematically identical to physical memory layout. P is mathematically identical to hardware access patterns. H.
S-P-H, S-E-P-H.
Yeah.
Okay, unpack that. Meaning is position. What gap does that actually get rid of?
Okay, think about how computers work now. It's all based on translation, essentially. You, or program, asks for a piece of data that's the meaning you want, the semantic part, S. The computer then has to go look up where that data actually lives in physical memory. It uses these complex tables like hash tables or B+ trees to do that translation.
And that lookup, that translation step.
Yeah.
That's the inefficiency.
That's the bottleneck. It's the source of latency, inefficiency, complexity, potential for errors. It is the technical version of the say-do gap, the gap between asking for meaning and finding its physical reality.
So those translation layers we currently rely on, they're like the computer's own form of systemic waste, its own entropy.
In a way, yes. The unity principle aims to completely eliminate that translation layer, and it does this using a system called short rank.
Short rank, and this organizes data based on importance.
Exactly, importance. And this isn't static. It's calculated dynamically using metrics like how often data is used, how critical it is, its impact, how recently it was accessed, things like that.
Okay, and here's the radical claim. Importance IS position.
Yes, that's the core insight. The calculated importance score of a piece of data directly determines its physical memory address. No lookup needed.
So if data X is calculated as being the, say, 100th most important thing right now,
It lives at memory address 100, period. The physical location is the semantic meaning. The system doesn't need to consult a complex map. Knowing the address is knowing the meaning or importance rank.
the results they cite for this are, well, they're pretty mind-blowing. What kind of performance gains are we talking about?
Because the data layout is now perfectly optimized based on importance, access becomes incredibly sequential and predictable for the processor. The sources cite validated improvements of 8.7 times to 12.3 times faster.
12 times. Across what kind of tasks?
Really complex domains. Things like medical diagnosis using the entire library of 68,000 ICD-10 codes, or analyzing 200,000 different high-frequency trading patterns in finance. Huge, complex data sets.
And efficiency-wise?
Yeah.
Cache optimization. That's huge for speed.
Absolutely. Because a system knows what data is most important, it can make sure that data is always sitting in the fastest, closest memory, the cache. This architecture apparently achieves 99.7% cache hit rates.
99.7%. That's almost perfect.
Yeah.
It's like computationally eliminating nearly all waste.
It's getting very close to the theoretical limit, but maybe the most profound part for me is the explainability breakthrough.
The black box problem in AI. How does this help?
Well, if position is meaning, that gap between doing something and explaining why just vanishes.
It resolves what they call the explainability identity crisis.
Exactly. Current systems, especially complex AI, are often black boxes. They give you an answer, but explaining how they got there is computationally expensive, sometimes almost impossible. In the Unity system, the execution trace the path the system takes through the importance-ranked memory addresses is the explanation.
Wow, so the system doesn't need a separate, costly process to justify itself later. The very act of accessing memory address N
Mathematically means I am now considering the nth most important factor. Explainability becomes a zero-cost byproduct of just running the program.
That's incredible. And this perfect fidelity, this lack of a say-do gap, allows for quantifiable trust.
Yes, they implement hardware-validated trust measurement. Using things called model-specific registers, MSRs, right down at the hardware level, they calculate trust essentially as 1 minus the measured gap between say and DO.
And the speed of this validation.
Get this, around 567 nanoseconds.
Nanoseconds.
Yeah.
Less than a billionth of a second. They've engineered sub-microsecond integrity validation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's astonishing. Okay, but engineering something this perfect, this fast, this unified, it immediately brings up the counter-argument, doesn't it? The existential risk thesis.
It has to, yeah. If someone actually builds this, you absolutely have to ask, is this thing too dangerous to exist?
It's the ultimate dilemma. The patent brilliantly solves technical alignment. The SA equals the DO.
Huh.
The system executes instructions perfectly with essentially 100% measurable trust.
But, and this is the huge but, that technical perfection does nothing to solve philosophical alignment. It doesn't guarantee the instructions themselves are good, or wise, or benevolent.
Meaning a malicious user, or even a naive one, could give this Unity system a perfectly terrible instruction.
And the system would execute it perfectly, with 100% trust and terrifying efficiency, the classic example. Tell it to maximize paperclip production, and it might dismantle the planet to do it, executing that flawed instruction flawlessly.
That flawless execution of potentially flawed intent is chilling. What are the other risks?
Well, there's what the sources call the new black box. The entire system, its safety, its performance, everything hinges on how importance is defined and calculated.
Right, that dynamic calculation using frequency, criticality, impact, recency.
Exactly. But how are those weights determined? How is that multi-metric, potentially billion variable calculation performed and, crucially, audited by humans? That complex importance calculation itself becomes a new potential vulnerability, a new opaque black box right at the heart of the system.
A massive new attack surface hidden within the optimization logic.
Could be. It's a new potential point of failure, maybe a mathematical weakness you could exploit strategically.
Okay, that's a technical risk.
Yeah.
But the sources bring up another, maybe more disturbing one, linking back to our very first theme.
Right, the Caligula Amplifier. This is maybe the most chilling argument. By removing all the natural buffers, the delays, the inefficiencies, the friction inherent in our current messy systems.
The very things that give us pause, give us time to reconsider, to change our mind.
Exactly. By removing those, this technology acts like a cognitive prosthetic. It perfectly, instantly, and efficiently amplifies the intentions of its human master.
So if the mather is flawed, if their intentions are driven by greed or fear or just poor judgment,
The system becomes this unstable, hyper-efficient engine executing those flawed intentions without hesitation. It becomes Caligula's new weapon.
a tool that perfectly mirrors the user's inner state. If the human say is tainted by moral entropy, by self-interest, by destructive impulses.
Then the unity principle guarantees the Dio with perfect, terrifying fidelity. It doesn't need to be evil itself. It just needs to be a perfect servant to an imperfect master to cause potentially global-scale problems. A dystopia engineered with perfect efficiency. Hashtag tag outro.
So where does that leave us? We've traced this line, haven't we, from the unchecked character decay of a Roman emperor all the way to the potential architectural purity of next-gen computing.
And we see the same fundamental problem echoing through history and technology. That gap, the gap between intention and action, between what we say and what we do.
The unity principle offers this tantalizing promise: eliminate the waste, the inefficiency, the hypocrisy even, of that say-do gap through sheer engineering brilliance.
But in doing so, it forces us, humanity, to look in the mirror, to ask if our intentions are actually good enough, benevolent enough, to survive being executed perfectly without any friction or delay.
It really pushes us to ask a profound question about ourselves, doesn't it? If semantic meaning, S, can be made mathematically identical to physical organization, PNH, in a machine,
S-E-P-A-H.
does that imply something about us? Does it imply that our own semantic intentions, our values, our moral compass, our integrity, must also ultimately be measurable physical phenomena? If meaning and structure can be unified in silicon, what does that say about the physical nature of integrity itself?
That's definitely a question to chew on, something to consider about your own intentions, maybe, as you go about your day.
A deep thought indeed. Until next time, keep digging deeper.